Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to another episode of She Talks Business. I am back here with the wonderful Cass Bald, and this is our fourth episode in our strategic marketing series. And today we're going to talk about podcasting and how podcasting should fit into your marketing strategy. So, Cass, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so fun doing these with you, and I love the little preamble we have before the show. We should probably be recording those because those conversations are often juicy and fun. So, backstory, we were having a little bit of dialogue about the presidential election and the role that podcasting played in the election, and how a lot of people, depending on where you consume content, whether you view it on X or you view it on Twitter, or not Twitter, TikTok, the TikTok, you may have seen some commentary from people who were influenced in terms of who they voted for by virtue of the podcasts that the candidates were on. And I think the most famous one obviously is the Joe Rogan podcast, where he was interviewing former president and president-elect Donald Trump for 3 hours with a huge array of questions on just about any topic. And what I love about podcasting, and I think is important if you're listening and you either have your own podcast or you want to be on podcasts, is it's really important, if you want to be known as a leader in your space, that you can actually do that you can show up and be interviewed on a podcast, and you can respond to whatever question someone asks you, and you can do it with confidence and not, you shouldn't need those questions in advance. I have to tell you, I don't know what episode we're on now, 100 and some odd, 50 some odd. I don't even know. I've lost track. We've done so many of these. It might even be over 200 now. But I have never given anyone a list of questions, because if you can't come on the show and just chat, then you really aren't you're not really an expert in what you do. And so I think it's important as a host and as a guest for you to develop that comfort level in terms of having unscripted dialogue. I do not read a script for these podcasts. So you will hear ums and ahs and outtakes, like sometimes the dogs bark, etc. You got to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, we could talk about politics all day long. You and I often like sparring about our political beliefs in like fun and professional way. But what we're really here to do today is talk about podcasting and how it relates to your business and how you can leverage that. And so on the note of the most recent presidential election, there's been a lot of discourse about how Donald Trump's presence on the Joe Rogan podcast may have tipped the scales for a lot of voters because of A, the way that he showed up and presented himself, and B, the fact that Joe Rogan is, for many people, highly regarded and a trusted source of information. So for you as a business owner, you should be thinking about how you're running your own campaign and who you are being endorsed by. So when you show up on podcasts, well-known podcasts and podcasts that target your ideal audience, you're essentially gaining a endorsement from that podcaster, which benefits your credibility and brings you greater reach to broader audiences too.
100%. Communication skills are key. I love what you said when you're thinking about your own campaign, because isn't that what it really is? Isn't marketing your business your own campaign? It's very similar to wanting to win an election. You're trying to win new business. And when you're trying to win new business, you need to be thoughtful about how you approach things and how you do things and how you communicate and how you're perceived. So I think there's lots to be learned there. So let's talk a little bit about podcasting in general. So everybody and their dog's dog have a podcast, it seems, today. And I know a lot of people say things to me like, oh my God, Lisa, the market is so saturated. Like, I don't know if I should start a podcast. Aren't there already enough podcasts? Well, let me tell you something. There are a ton of podcasts, but there's also a ton of what's called pod fade. And Pod fade speaks to the fact that 90% of podcasts never make it past the third episode. And those who do make it past three, a very large percentage quit by the time they get to 20 because they're not seeing the results that they want. In fact, there are fewer than 5% of podcasts that ever make it to 100 episodes. So when you are looking at podcasting and thinking, oh, the market is oversaturated, I want you to look at the market and I want you to really consider that there's probably only 5 to 10% of the podcasts that you see out there that are actually active.
And I want to add to something you said a little bit earlier. And I want people to think about podcasting almost akin to book writing, right? There's a lot of books out there. There's more books out there than there are podcasts out there. Does that mean that nobody should ever write a book again? No, because when you show up with pure thought leadership and unique ideas and value, people are going to pick your podcast and want to listen to what you have to say over others for the same reason people choose to read some books over others.
That's right. We all have a different affinity for different personality types, and we all learn differently. And some people's form of teaching and communicating is effective for one group and it's not effective for another. So never underestimate the power of your voice and the impact that it can have through podcasting. So let's talk a little bit about, there's 5 key reasons why podcasts are not as successful as they could be. And so what I think I'd like to do, Cass, if you're good with this, is I'd like to talk about those 5 issues. And then I'd like to maybe, like, as we go through them one at a time, kind of talk about what we advise our clients to do in order to turn this issue into an opportunity. Sound good?
Yeah, I love it.
So the first reason that podcasts tend to fail to get off the ground is people don't have an actual content strategy. They listen to a couple of podcasts online and they think they can wing it, and they stall very quickly because they don't actually have a strategy to allow them to stay in the game for more than a couple of episodes. So when you are thinking about your strategy for podcasting, I think that you have to think about it in a couple of different ways. What is the format? What is the content? Like, what is the topic or theme? And how many are you going to do? So like this, for example, is a special season or a special series rather that Cass and I are doing together on strategic marketing. We did another series with a colleague of mine, Mary Farron, on AI. Then we have guest interviews. Then we have solo episodes. Sometimes we have seasons with a themed topic. Like, there's all kinds of things that we do. But if you don't actually have a roadmap, it makes it really hard for you to stay in the game because you run into that, I don't know what to literally say.
Yeah, so building out a strategy, and you don't always have to stick to one type of episode. There are people out there that always do a guest interview and never anything other than that. And there are people out there that always have a panel and have multiple people on the interview and never do anything other than that. And then there's some people who are just a solo podcast, or there are 2 hosts that speak to each other in every episode. You don't have to stick to one thing. So Lisa, you're a great example for She Talks Business. You change the style of episode to fit the topic you wish to talk about. So when you want to talk about AI, you bring somebody else in who is also passionate about AI so that you guys can have really energetic discourse about it. If you're looking to talk about let's say automation for marketing, but really in depth. Well, you know a lot about automation, but you are not an automation expert yourself. So you might bring in somebody who is an automation expert. Mm-hmm. You can flex the style of episode to make the most sense for the topic you wish to discuss.
Absolutely. I think what's important is that you have a North Star in terms of what is the purpose of this episode or this series of episodes in order to be of service and value to the audience. Unless you are someone like a Tim Ferriss, who is just interview after interview after interview, right? There is no theme. Tim Ferriss isn't interviewing all sci-fi authors and then interviewing all Olympic athletes. Like his podcast is very varied, and that's part of what makes his podcast unique. Whereas if you are struggling because you don't have a content strategy, chances are you have not sat down and thoughtfully planned out your first 15 to 25 episodes and created some type of a roadmap that you can follow in order to get those episodes done. The other thing that I would say in terms of a content strategy is you can't start a podcast with one episode. The recommendation is that you publish 2 to 3, if not 4, in the first week that your podcast launches. And I recommend that you have at least 10 in the can when you start, because life will happen and you will get busy and there will be reasons why you can't record the next episode. And you will go through things like, I am going to batch record, 6 or 7 episodes in a day. And then you'll go through seasons where I'm going to do one a week, and you'll be all over the place. So when you have some episodes already pre-thought out and pre-recorded, it gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of showing up and recording things on a timely basis.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the top recommendations whenever we're managing a new podcast project for a client. And on the topic of your content strategy, you have to think beyond the episode itself. That episode needs to be part of your larger strategy, and you need to be thinking about all the ways that you're going to use the content that you've just created to not only promote the episode, but how you can promote other things in your business as well. So are you going to take the audio recording and cut it up into small segments? Are you going to take the videos and turn them into reels? Are you going to take the
I'm going to stop you for a
transcript?
second. I'm going to stop you for a second because that's actually one of the reasons that podcasts fail. One
Great.
of the other reasons is there is no distribution strategy. People are not actually thinking about the strategy within the strategy and how to distribute the content. So when you think about that, now keep going, keep talking about what we were talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. So are you going to take the transcript and dice it up and pull impactful quotes out of it to use that on social media? Are you going to take the transcript and turn it into a blog post or multiple blog posts? There's endless possibilities for how you can use the podcast content beyond just posting it to podcast streaming platforms. And you're right. A lot of people fail to consider that, or they get caught up on the podcasting aspect of it and then forget to do anything more with it. So the podcast never really gets any legs, because how are people supposed to find out about it unless you're actively promoting it on your social channels?
Right. And even more, in addition to promoting it on your social channels, is being mindful of the keywords that you use and the descriptions that you use when you're uploading your podcast, because your podcast players all have a very robust search engine, and podcasts are actually searchable by Google as well. So when you are looking for podcasts on certain topics, people can find you if you've used the right keywords. So while that is an inbound strategy for distribution, it's equally as important as your outbound strategy. All right. Do you want to add something before I go to the next thing?
No, you're good. What's next on our list?
Okay. Next is they have no production system. So, the first thing I'm going to say is, if you want your podcast to be produced in a certain way, it takes a lot of time, effort, energy, and sometimes many hands to produce that episode. And so some people just fail to really understand the amount of time and attention that goes into the production part of bringing a quality episode to life. So Cass, can you talk a little bit about all the different steps that go into us producing this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I want you all to know that the team to produce a weekly episode for She Talks Business is about 8 people strong. There are 8 sets of hands that are touching every single episode before you ever hear it, because the process is truly that involved, and it's not necessarily something that one person might have every single skill to take care of. So often multiple different people with different sets of expertise need to be involved. So like just from the top, you need the right equipment, a microphone, a good recording tool, and you need to put the preparation in ahead of time, which sometimes includes having somebody do research on your guest for you so that you're prepared, or maybe you have to do that research yourself.
Yeah, I have an
Then,
episode planner that Michelle
yeah.
fills out with all the guest details, their bios, and she does the scheduling. So there you go.
Mhm.
That's like step one.
Yeah. Then after that, you actually record the episode. That audio and video needs to be cleaned up, cut, trimmed, edited in whatever way you need. Lisa's really great about just saying, leave the ums and ahs in. It's real, it's raw, it's authentic. Other people want every single and ah edited out so that it's seamless, and that's okay too. But that requires a video and audio editor. From there, somebody has to write the show notes. That means they're listening to the entire recording so that they can create really strong SEO savvy show notes that are the correct lengths and intriguing enough to go on the podcast players. There's somebody making all the graphics for the episode. So that's the thumbnail images, the social media graphics, and somebody editing any of the reels that are going on social media. There's somebody writing the content and posting it on social media.
There's like putting it on the website.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
getting it on the website, getting it up on Libsyn and getting it to all the different channels,
Mm-hmm.
adding the bumpers,
Mm-hmm.
the intro and the outro on every one. Um, and then sending out the email to let people know that a new episode has been released. So, you've got somebody who does basically editing, you've got somebody who does writing, you've got somebody who does create social content, you've got somebody who does the blog setup, you've got somebody who does the newsletter distribution. There's a bunch of moving parts. And so when you are doing this, like, I'm not trying to scare you, but there are, sometimes people look at it on the surface and they think, oh, it looks easy. And they think you press an easy button and it happens. It doesn't happen that easily. It goes through a number of people's hands to make it the best quality thing that we can put out there. And if you don't have a system for how that gets done and the order that the baton gets passed from one person to the next and the QCing of the actual episode, then you will end up either not being able to finish production or you will have a poorly produced show.
Lisa, there's a hack that our team has recently been using for people who are just trying to dip their toes into podcasting, who aren't ready to go all in and do all of that we've just described, but want to start by just getting something out there. And do you want to talk a little bit about the AI tool that we've been using?
No, you can go ahead. Let
Okay,
everybody
great.
know. You know
So
more about it than I do.
yeah, great. There is a really amazing AI tool. There's actually many amazing AI tools that, contrary to what my previous belief was, actually sound really human and really good. And maybe you're not ready to go all in on podcasting, but if you want to give it a try, you can easily take one of your blog posts or something you've already written and plug it into this software, which is very inexpensive, by the way, and it will spit out a pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good conversation style audio recording that could pass as a legitimate podcast. And because you already have the content written, your show notes are easy. And because it's AI generated, you don't have to do most of the editing that you do with real voices. And it's just a quick way. And you don't have to do a whole, plan to do a whole podcast. You could start with just a mini series. You could pick one key theme and then plan 5 episodes that you want to do on that series and just try it out. It's a good way to practice the process of podcasting. It's a good way to see if your audience is interested in a podcast and hearing what you have to say in an audio format. And it might make you realize that having your own podcast is something that you really want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next thing is lack of patience. So people start a podcast and they think that they should have 1,000 downloads overnight. And podcasting is a long game. And 1,000 downloads may not be what you need. You may need 100 downloads a week. You may need 10 downloads a week. it's more about making sure the right people are listening and getting value than it is trying to be the next Joe Rogan or the next Tim Ferriss. Like, don't let vanity metrics stop you from putting value out into the world. You have to be patient. And if you're not doing the distribution things that we talked about to get eyeballs and ears on your podcast, then it's going to be hard for you to build and grow your podcast as quickly as you would like.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people quit, and doesn't just apply to podcasting. This applies to a lot of different aspects of marketing and business. A lot of people quit before they give themselves a chance to succeed because they're afraid. Fear of failure makes you quit before you have the opportunity to actually fail. Yeah. So give it time. And, if maybe you're approaching that point where you think you should start to be generating some greater download numbers, or you should be getting some traction and it's not there, well, the good news is you're listening to this episode and we're telling you some of the ways that you might be messing it up.
Here's another little tip for people. You can't expect your episode to get the traction that you want the first week it is released. Podcasts continue to get downloads and listens and things for years. So, sometimes I go back and I listen to Tim Ferriss episodes that he recorded years ago because I want to hear the conversation that he had with a certain person. So your downloads continue to live on. So don't assume that because your download growth didn't happen within a 7-day period that wasn't a good show. Sometimes it takes time for those things to take off. You got to play the long game. All right, the last thing is people actually lose listeners within the first 3 to 5 minutes because during the first 3 to 5 minutes, they're rambling on and on and on, or they put all these ads at the beginning of their podcast and people don't want to listen to that stuff. So they lose people within the first 5 minutes because they don't make the first 5 minutes of what they're talking about interesting. So just like when you're scrolling on social media, a hook is what actually makes you stop and double click or swipe and want to read more or watch a video. You need to be thinking about hooky content at the beginning of your podcast so that your listeners want to keep listening to you.
It really comes back to marketing 101. You have to stand out from the crowd and you have to interest people and you have to provide them value. So, we have shorter attention spans than ever. And we know that's true when it comes to social media. We know that's true when it comes to video content. You always have to have a hook of some sort there. And it's really true with audio content too. If you aren't bringing people in, drawing them in with a really juicy bit of the conversation, I would even go as far as to say it needs to be in the first 2 minutes, not even the first 5 minutes. The first 2 minutes need to interest people. Otherwise, you're just going to lose them.
Yeah, 100%. I agree completely. So there's one other thing that I want to just talk about. So those were the 5 reasons why people tend to not be successful, and some suggestions or recommendations we have on how to actually turn that around. There is one other thing that's not on that list that I think is really important, and that is the quality of microphone you use to record your podcast. So I am using a Rode microphone. It's a good quality microphone. A lot of people don't understand how to use their microphone. So I want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen to me now. Do you hear the difference? So the difference is when you talk really, really close to your microphone, which doesn't look great on video. If you're watching the video, you're seeing my hair. Your audio sounds so much better. So people will listen to audio quality that is okay, but the better your audio quality is, the better chance you have of someone continuing to listen. When you don't take care of the audio and the audio is choppy or there's tons of noise in the background, people are going to not continue. People will watch a bad video if they can hear what's being said, but they won't listen to a podcast if they can't understand what you're saying. So it's really important that you've got a good microphone for your podcast. My microphone's fairly old. I probably need to get a newer one that allows it to be closer to my face when I'm speaking so that the quality is better. But I think it's one of those things that when people always ask me, what tools they need, we're using Riverside FM. We just started using Riverside. We've used Zoom for years. I still think Zoom is fine. There's things I like better about Zoom than Riverside, specifically the touch up my appearance on camera. But you also have to ask yourself, what is the style of your podcast? Are you striving for primarily audio listeners? Or are you striving primarily for video watchers? And a lot of people, we're going to talk in our next episode about the power of video and repurposing. So we're going to go into details around how you can take your video from your podcast and use it in a bunch of different ways. But I think you have to ask yourself, what are you optimizing for first? Are you optimizing for audio or are you optimizing for video? If you're optimizing for audio, make sure you have a really great microphone and forget what your background and all that stuff looks like. But if you're optimizing for video, make sure you've got great lighting and a great camera so that it looks and sounds good. So here's the difference. If you're optimizing for audio only, who cares about the video? But if you're optimizing for video, you need to care about both.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this before. I am a quote unquote podcast consumer via video only. Like I watch podcast content on Reels and on TikTok. You like audio only because you like
100%.
to do other things while you're listening, and that's true for a lot of people. But there's definitely an audience for both, and it comes down to what you think your audience cares the most about, and then what effort you're also willing to put in. Because to have really, really well done video content to accompany your podcast, it requires a greater setup. It often requires multiple camera angles. It often requires you to be in person with your guest so that you can.
Oh yeah, the studio thing's super hot right now.
Yeah, it's so hot. Well, and it's not always a studio necessarily. It's really, there's a lot of podcasts out there where it's like two people that are sitting on a couch and they have a camera set up facing each of them so that they can switch between angles, and they have their high quality mics, but it's casual and laid back, but still high quality. Whereas right now, Lisa and I are virtual. We're in 2 different countries, but we are using the Riverside tool so that we can easily stack our video or edit it to go back and forth between our cameras, depending on who's speaking. So yeah, it just depends on who you are and what you want to do.
So one final nugget before we wrap up. Seth Godin will never say yes to being on a podcast that hasn't done at least 100 episodes, because he believes that anybody who is serious about podcasting needs to get the 100 reps in, and he knows that 5% of people are able to do that. So if you want to be taken seriously in the podcast game, when you start with that strategy, try to build out a 100 episode strategy, or at least a multi-quarter, multi-year strategy, so that you can stay in the game and be a 5%er instead of 95% who never, ever, ever make it to that level. So thanks so much for listening. Cass, thanks for all of your great input. And I hope that if you don't have a podcast and you're thinking about a podcast, that this conversation helps you to consider what some of your options might be for 2025. I will tell you that when I released this podcast, I remember doing a lot of recording and preparations for the podcast over the holiday season so that I could actually release it in the new year. So now is a great time for you to be preparing and getting some of those episodes in the can so that you can release them next year. And don't let the story you're telling yourself about other people already being out there doing it stop you, because your voice, your perspective is different from everyone else's, and it deserves to be heard. Thanks for listening, and stick around, because the next podcast that we are going to share in the series is all about video, and you'll get some great strategies for 2025 from this one too.